My life ain't worth losing while riding shotgun, young, dumb, cruising, snoozing. And I feel the same way y'all feel, looking up death. I'll put out my records independently. That way, there ain't no yanking me. Suge Knight, cause your company finna fall.
I can't believe you would do what you done. Cross death row and get where you from.
Snoop Dogg switch gangs, talk about the east side, or who the baddest Rouge, man.
They Dogg, Eminem, and Snoop.
Ain't no telling what I'm gonna do when I catch that scary ass Snoop.
And what's up with these little stylists from J? Heard they tried to diss. They on my bitch list. 2 years I got to get with.
I ain't running and I ain't hiding. I'm east side for life. Y'all know where to find me. Why you say I'm a dead man? Keep talking. Don't even trip, doggy dog. Nigga, keep walking, cause they keep stalking with all that cheap talking. Suge Knight is a biatch.
What's up, we're back with a new video, and in this one we'll do a deep dive breakdown. And when I say deep, I mean deep like the mines of Minota. This is the most detailed breakdown video ever about the complete timeline in chronological order of the nearly 10-year-long crazy beef between Snoop Dogg and Suge Knight and Death Row Records affiliated artists. Eventually it all ended well, and the beef between Snoop and Suge was eventually squashed, but during those years many crazy and intensive things happened, and it got really serious at some point. And in this video we'll provide a full detailed breakdown of everything that happened, all the fights and all the disses that were recorded on both sides, what exactly was said, and also the reason why it was said. There's a lot of information you can find on YouTube, but it's all fragmented, so if you really want to know the full story of how everything went down in this crazy beef, then this is the right video for you. And I'm sure that you will learn a couple of new things by watching this video that you didn't know before. Now follow me, but don't lose your grip, cause we're gonna cover a whole lot of shit. And here's a quick overview of the topics that we'll cover in this video. And we'll start at the beginning, and that's how the beef between Snoop, Suge Knight and Death Row Records started. And this was partly due to Snoop having a different vision regarding the beef with Bad Boy Records, which caused friction back in '96. We'll also do a breakdown of the various events that escalated the tension between Snoop, Tupac and Suge. We'll dive into what else caused Snoop to become unhappy with Death Row, leading to him being stuck in a difficult situation, and how Master P stepped in and helped Snoop transition from Death Row to No Limit Records. We'll also cover the diss tracks that Snoop recorded aimed at Suge and Death Row when he was still signed to Death Row Records, and also the tracks in which Snoop dissed Death Row Records and Suge that were recorded after he left Death Row Records. Of course, we'll also do a breakdown of the diss tracks recorded by former Death Row Records and also later rebranded as The Row artists during this beef in which they dissed Snoop. We'll also go in depth into the fights and threats that took place throughout the years, and trust me, there are some crazy stories in there. And we'll end this video on a positive note, and that's how Snoop and Suge eventually got together, talked it out like men, and they squashed the heated beef. Originally I planned to make just one video, but my research uncovered so much information that the final video ended up being more than 1.5 hours long, so I've decided to release this documentary in 3 parts. And part 1 covers the period from '96 to '98, detailing the origins of the tension between Snoop Dogg and Death Row Records and the events leading to his fallout with Suge Knight and the label. And part 2 covers the '98 to 2000 era when Snoop was signed to No Limit Records, and during this time Death Row actively tried to intimidate and obstruct him, leading to some intense conflicts. And part 3, which is the final part, covers the 2000 to 2005 era. That was after Snoop left No Limit and he founded his own label, Doghouse/Doggy Style Records, and this period saw Snoop and his team openly clashing with Death Row Records, which was then rebranded as The Row. And the video you're watching right now is part 1, part 2 will be online next week, and part 3 the following week, so make sure to check out all the parts to fully understand everything that went down in this crazy beef. And as you will see in this video, I now have a new format with which I want to improve the quality of the videos and also use more video footage to make the videos more interesting. And I've put a lot of time and efforts into making this video and doing all the research, so if you find it interesting, I really appreciate it if you could drop a like. And if you want to see more videos like this, check out the other videos on the channel as well. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated on the latest content. And if you have any additional information or insights about this beef, feel free to share it with the community and drop a comment below. And now let's get started with this video. And we'll start off at the very beginning, and that's how the beef between Snoop, Suge Knight and Death Row Records began. As widely known, Snoop Dogg was the superstar in the early years of Death Row Records, achieving massive success after Dr. Dre's album The Chronic dropped and with his debut album Doggy Style that was released in 1993. And things started to change a few years later in 96 when Tupac was signed to Death Row Records as an artist. And Snoop and Tupac collaborated on several tracks, and if you want to know all the details about the tracks they recorded together, make sure to check out the video on the channel with the title Tupac and Snoop Dogg 12 Collaborations Breakdown. And Snoop and Tupac became good friends, but the beef between Tupac and Suge with Bad Boy Records also created friction between Snoop and Suge and Death Row. And most people already know the backstory and that there was tension between Tupac and Snoop shortly before Tupac passed away in Las Vegas. And this tension stemmed from an interview that Snoop did in 96 where he said he was cool with Biggie and Bad Boy Records, and this interview took place with Angie Martinez when Snoop, Tupac and Death Row were in New York. And Angie asked Snoop about his thoughts on the beef between Tupac, Death Row and Bad Boy. And many years later Snoop spoke with Angie Martinez again in an interview, and this is what he said about that original interview that took place in 96. And he said, "You asked how do you feel about Puffy and Biggie since they're East Coast and I'm from the West Side. And I said, I'm cool with them. I want to make music with them. I want to work with them because I thought they were dope. I didn't see them as competition. They were friends. We would always hang out with Puff and Big. Would give them weed and chill with them. I love Biggie and I love Pac." End quote. And Snoop and Biggie had known each other for a long time, and there's even video footage where you can see Biggie, Snoop, the Dogg Pound and Tupac all on stage performing together. And when the beef between Tupac and Bad Boy was at its peak, Tupac expected Snoop to take his side, thinking Snoop would share his mentality and vision, which was basically F Bad Boy. And when the interview took place between Snoop and Angie Martinez in 96, Tupac wasn't present at the location, but he was in New York and he listened to the interview on the radio. So when Tupac heard Snoop say on the radio that he was cool with Biggie and Puffy and saw them as his homeboys, he lost his mind. He took it as betrayal by Snoop and he felt that Snoop wasn't being loyal to him. Now in Snoop's defense, you could see it from a different perspective. For example, if two of your friends get into a beef, why wouldn't you just stay out of it and continue being friends with both? Let them fight their own battles instead of choosing one side. But let me know what you think about this. Do you think that Snoop should have chosen Tupac's side and said that he wasn't down with Biggie and Puffy on the radio? Or do you think that Snoop did the right thing by staying neutral in the beef between Tupac and Bad Boy? So share your opinion in the comments. Now another factor that contributed to the tension was that Tupac expected Snoop to adopt the same mindset of F Bad Boy, especially after the incident where the Dogg Pound trailer was shot at while they were in New York filming the music video for the track New York, New York from the Dogg Pound's album Dog Food. And Snoop and Dez and Corrupt, who were known as the Dogg Pound, wanted to film a scene for the music video in Red Hook, Brooklyn. So when they were in New York, Biggie called into the Hot 97 radio show and he said, "Red Hook, Brooklyn, stand up. Tupac and the Dogg Pound are shooting a video in Brooklyn right now." And for some reason, Biggie thought that Tupac was also present in the trailer, but that wasn't the case. Tupac wasn't there. And shortly after, shots were fired at the trailer, but fortunately, no one was injured. And there are various opinions about the true intent of the track New York, New York, and supposedly the track and the music video were originally intended to pay homage to New York, which is why they wanted to film it there in New York, according to Snoop, as he mentioned in several interviews. Corrupt also discusses this in an interview, and in the music video you can see Snoop kicking down buildings in New York, which can be taken as a sign of disrespect, but in several interviews they said that it was only done as a retaliation for the trailer being shot at when they were in New York. And there isn't a single lyric in the song that disrespects New York. The chorus is from a famous song by New York artists, and however, to some people it seemed as if New Yorkers were being mocked in the intro of the song with typical New York slang and lines like,
Yo, beast the blunt, man. Turn the speakers up, money. God. Yo, God.
Yo, money.
Yo, I got mad shit, money.
Snoop mentioned in an interview that the New York slang in the intro was meant to show respect and love for the East Coast. When they were recording the track, no New Yorkers were present in the studio, so they decided to use the slang themselves. At first they also wanted New York MCs in the video, and they invited several New York rappers to the video shoot, but eventually none of that happened after shots were fired at the trailer. And a little fun fact about New York is that the beat was produced by DJ Pooh, and it was originally Biggie's beat, and you can find this track online under the title Brew Guzzler. If you haven't heard it yet, make sure to check it out because Biggie also killed it on that beat. So when Snoop heard Biggie's track, he reached out to his friend DJ Pooh, who produced the beat, and he asked him if he could use that beat, so that's why DJ Pooh gave it to him. And that's how it happened that New York was created, and it ended up on the Dogg Pound's first album, Dog Food. And another fact is that the shooting in New York at the Dogg Pound trailer was also the reason that Dez and Corrupt, along with Tupac, recorded the track NY87. And in this track they dissed the East Coast, and Tupac showed his loyalty, and he also fired some shots on this track. And he also referred to the incident where shots were fired at the Dogg Pound trailer. Tupac already had beef with Bad Boy Records after he was shot in New York, and the shooting at the Dogg Pound trailer added even more fuel to the fire because the Dogg Pound and Snoop were Tupac's label mates because they all were signed to Death Row Records. And here's the part of the track where Tupac refers to the shooting at the Dogg Pound trailer.
You shot at my homies, now I'm a blast. Screaming thug like off of them when I pass. NY87.
Snoop wasn't featured on the track NY87, but since the Dogg Pound was Snoop's clique, and they made a clear statement in this diss track on how they felt about the East Coast. Now in Tupac's eyes, it was probably logical to assume that Snoop shared the same feelings towards the East Coast as his homies from the Dogg Pound. And another reason that Pac probably believed that Snoop Dogg would also be against Bad Boy is that Snoop had recorded a track where he dissed Biggie. In an interview, Napoleon of the Outlaws also mentioned that Snoop Dogg had played this track for Tupac and he bragged about dissing Biggie. And the track we're talking about is titled Keep It Real, which was never released at the time, but years later in 2009 it was released on Snoop's album titled The Lost Sessions. And on this track Snoop doesn't mention Biggie by name, but there was a part on the track that clearly refers to Biggie, and Snoop said,
Return of the Jedi. Don't say this cause I already said I be on the red eye. You're fat, you're black, you're whack, your style is toe up, plus you got one dead eye.
Another version of Keep It Real was also recorded and released without the diss towards Biggie, and it was released on the album Death Row Snoop Doggy Dogg at his best. On this version you can hear Badass, Corrupt, Mac 10, Technique and Threat. The beat is the same as the solo version by Snoop, and Snoop doesn't spit any verses, but he only sings the chorus using the same lyrics as on the solo version. Another track in which Snoop mentioned Bad Boy Records, and it was intended for the LBC Crew album, which was never released at the time. The title of the track is Haven't You Heard, and it was meant to be the intro track for the album, which would have the same title. On the track Snoop says,
It ain't hard to tell, but it's easy to see, and even no bad boy fucking up the industry.
And it's not entirely clear to me what the intention behind this line was. It could be seen as a diss towards Bad Boy, but it could also be interpreted as a positive statement suggesting that they got the industry on lockdown. So let me know in the comments, what do you think that Snoop meant with this line in which he mentioned Bad Boy? And also, during the performance where Snoop and Tupac were on stage together at the House of Blues, Tupac made negative comments about Biggie, and Snoop himself didn't say anything negative, but his body language, such as raising his fist in the air while Tupac spoke bad about Biggie, indicated that Snoop was supporting Tupac at that moment. So when Pac and other Death Row associates, including Suge Knight, heard that Snoop had said on the radio that Biggie and Puffy were his homies, it felt as if Snoop wasn't loyal. They thought that Snoop was sending mixed signals and playing both sides. And on one hand you might think that Snoop was playing both sides, but on the other hand you can also argue that Snoop was being the bigger person at the time by extending his hand to Biggie and Puffy during the so-called East Coast West Coast beef, as it was named by the media. And perhaps Snoop initially had a grudge against Biggie after the New York incident where the trailer was shot at, and that's why he dissed Biggie on the track Keep It Real, and that's why he also maybe said that line on the Haven't You Heard track referring to Bad Boy. But it's also possible that Snoop later realized that this entire beef would lead nowhere and would only result in more negativity and bigger problems. And to stop it, someone needed to be the bigger person, act maturely and extend the hand to the other side, which Snoop did. And instead of seeing him as being disloyal, you can also respect him for that. And you also have to keep in mind that Snoop had just beat a murder case a few months prior. He was also becoming a father, and that definitely influenced his mindset and made him want to avoid all the BS and negativity. You can say what you want, but Snoop is certainly not a follower, because if he was, he would have aligned himself with Suge Knight and Tupac to stay in their good graces, which would have been much easier for him to do at the time. And it really depends on how you look at it, and it also depends on your character. Whether you're someone who acts primarily on emotion or someone who thinks and acts more rationally. And I think that Tupac was generally someone who acted more based on his emotions and his principles, whereas Snoop seems to be someone who thinks more rationally and takes a more political approach in various situations. As mentioned, Tupac went ballistic when he heard what Snoop Dogg had said on the radio, stating that Biggie and Puffy were his homeboys and that he wanted to work with them. So after Snoop did the interview and he returned to the hotel, his uncle informed him that Tupac had said some negative things about Snoop due to the interview. In an interview that Snoop did years later, he said this about it. Quote, "When I got back to the hotel from doing the interview, my uncle come upstairs and he say, 'Tupac is tripping.' And Snoop was like, 'What you mean?' And his uncle said, 'He talk ish about you. I just heard him and he talking ish about you and he talking about going to the club and finding Biggie and F Biggie up.' And in that interview, Snoop also explained what happened when he got a phone call from Muta, who was Napoleon from the Outlaws, and Tupac. And he said this about it. So now I get a call in my room and it's Muta. He like, 'Pac wants some weed.' And Snoop was like, 'Tell Pac to come get the weed,' and hang up. Then Snoop got another phone call. And when Snoop answered the phone, he heard, 'It's Pac.' So Snoop was like, 'What's up?' And Pac said, 'Hey, Muta finna come get some weed for me.' And then he hung up. And Snoop also said this in that interview. 'Because I said I'm cool with Puffy and Biggie, Tupac took it as if I wasn't down with him no more. As if I was side busted. As if I was scared. Death Row looked at me as a traitor." End quote. And Suge and Pac also made it clear to Snoop that they disagreed with what he had said when they were on the flight back from New York. Snoop's security was not allowed to join them on the private plane. And according to Snoop, he tried to speak with Pac, but Pac completely ignored him. So when Snoop was ignored by Pac, it was clear to him that his friend had turned against him. So then Snoop went to the back of the plane and he put a blanket over his nose. Now I don't really know why he would put a blanket over his nose, but he said he did. And Snoop also took a knife and a fork with him as protection, which he held throughout the entire journey just in case things got out of hand and he was attacked. And Snoop said the following about it in an interview, and he said, quote, "The next day actually I had to fly back home from New York, and normally on the private plane it'd be Pac and his security, me and my security, Suge and a couple of his homies. This time I go to the airport, my security walking with me, and Suge was like, 'Hold up, they can't roll, they gotta catch a regular flight.' And Pac ain't said ish to me. So now I get on the plane, I'm like, 'What's up, Pac?' And they do me like this. So I walk to the back of the plane, get me a blanket, grab me a knife and a fork, put the blanket over my nose, I got my black glasses on and ride like this the whole flight, hoping one of them come F with me so I can step the ish out of everybody on this mother effer. This is a 5.5 hour flight, don't nobody say one word to me." End quote. After the plane landed, Snoop made one last attempt to speak with Pac when they got off the plane. A Rolls Royce was waiting for Pac and another Rolls Royce was waiting for Snoop. Before he got into his car, Snoop asked Pac if he was going to Las Vegas, but Pac didn't answer and completely ignored Snoop, giving him a look that clearly indicated that he did not want to talk to him. So when Snoop got home, he then discussed this entire incident with his homies from the Dogg Pound and they decided that they would not go to Las Vegas. This is why Snoop, Dez, Corrupt and other Dogg Pound affiliates were not there. And as we all know, the situation in Las Vegas ended tragically for Pac. After the altercation in the lobby with Orlando Anderson, Tupac was shot and it ultimately cost him his life. In an interview with Corrupt from the Dogg Pound, he mentioned that the East Coast rappers from Bad Boy were actually real friends of theirs and that they had made peace after the shooting in New York happened when they were there for the video shoot of the track New York, New York. And this is also confirmed by another interview with Snoop, where he also revealed that he met Biggie twice after the New York incident. The interviewer asked Snoop, "Did you ever speak to Biggie after the day of that shooting?" And Snoop said, quote, "I spoke to him twice. The first time was after Tupac died and I was in Atlanta. I seen Lil C's in the lobby at the Omni Hotel. So I see C's in the lobby and I say, C's, where Biggie at? I wanna holler at him. And C said, he upstairs, he wanna holler at you too. So Snoop was like, I'ma come upstairs and holler at him. Then C's take me upstairs. Biggie is upstairs in a walker, like what the old people walk around in. He got the little walker sitting at the edge of the bed. And when I walk in the room we started talking. He looked me in my eyes and he says something and he said that Tupac is dead, but I can look in his eyes and I can see that he hurt. He didn't even have to say it. I could see that he was hurt behind Tupac being dead. This is not a man that's happy or glamorized. This is his friend that's dead. And Snoop also said he could never get no justice for his emotions, but he's showing me his emotions. And he explained to me how much he loved Tupac. And I ain't tripping. And not once do we bring up the Brooklyn incident, referring to the shooting in Brooklyn, because what's understood don't need to be talked about. End quote. And when Snoop left, they exchanged numbers so they can stay in touch. And they would meet again 3 months later. And that would be the second time and also the last time after Tupac had passed away. And Snoop also explained how that went down and he said, quote, I go to New York about 3 months later. Biggie hit me up, hey, come by the studio. I went to the studio and he was like, I want you to hear this song. And he took me to another room and he played the song. End quote. And the song that Biggie played for Snoop was Somebody's Gotta Die, in which he also mentioned Snoop at the beginning of the song and he said,
I'm sitting in the crib dreaming about Lear jets and coupes, the way Salt shoops and how to sell records like Snoop.
And in that same interview Snoop said, quote, he played that record for me in front of all his homeboys. When the record went off, I was like, gosh, you killed that. And Biggie was like, I just want to give you some love and let you hear this. But his perspective, you could just tell that he wasn't tripping. He wanted the world to know I love Snoop Dogg. Snoop Dogg loves me because I already put it on the line that I loved him. But he could never come back and say I love Snoop because he had to stay in his lane because Pac was on him so tough. End quote. So Snoop felt honored that Biggie mentioned him on the track and he saw it as a confirmation of the good relationship they had. But according to Biggie's former bodyguard, Gene Deal, Biggie's intention was quite different and it was actually a subliminal diss towards Snoop. Biggie's album Life After Death, which included the track Somebody's Gotta Die, was released in March 97. And that was a few months later after Snoop's album The Dogfather was released on November the 2nd in 96. And according to Gene Deal, Biggie was referencing to the disappointing results with the line and how they sell records like Snoop, in which Biggie mentions Snoop's name. Now Gene Deal is reportedly not the most reliable source according to some people, but it could still be possible that Biggie threw a subliminal jab at Snoop with that line. However, he might not have been looking for beef and he could have played it off to Snoop as a shout out and a form of respect. Opinions are divided on this and I'm curious about your take on it. Do you think Biggie had good intentions with the line where he mentioned Snoop's name, or do you think it was a subliminal diss towards Snoop? Let me know in the comments. Compared to the first album Doggy Style, fewer copies were sold of The Dogfather, and it also faced quite a bit of criticism because the vibe was completely different from the iconic Doggy Style album. For many fans, including myself, The Dogfather is also considered a classic album, although it has a completely different vibe and sound compared to Doggy Style. And by the way, I also made a breakdown video of leftover tracks that were recorded during the Dogfather sessions but didn't make it onto the final album. You can find that video on the channel with the title The Dogfather 19 Leftover Tracks Breakdown. I also made a breakdown video of the leftover tracks that were recorded for Snoop's first album Doggy Style. You can find that video on the channel as well with the title Doggy Style 13 Leftover Tracks Breakdown. So if you want to know more about the leftover tracks for both albums, make sure to watch those videos. Now back to the story. As many people already know, Suge had his own issues with Puffy. This was also evident when he dissed Puffy on stage at the Source Awards, and Suge was also dating Puffy's ex-wife. And Suge also held Puffy personally responsible for the death of his close friend Jake Robles that happened in Atlanta in '95. And there was even speculation that Puffy had placed a $10,000 bounty on Death Row medallions. Suge turned on Snoop after the loss of Tupac because of his personal reasons and beef with Puffy and Bad Boy, feeling that Snoop didn't stand by him because Snoop wanted peace. So after Tupac's death, things began to change rapidly. Dre had already left the label and Snoop didn't support the negative approach and he wanted to remain neutral. The real turning point for Snoop to leave Death Row came when Suge went to jail on February the 28th in 97 for the incident in Las Vegas where Suge, Tupac and other Death Row associates had attacked Orlando Anderson in the hotel lobby. Camera footage showed Suge kicking Orlando and he was on probation, which is why he had to go to jail. Around this time, Snoop was also arrested by the police on gun charges. In an interview, Snoop explained how his house was raided by the police because they were looking for guns. So in February of 97, Snoop pled guilty to possession of a handgun and he was ordered to record 3 public service announcements, perform community service, pay a fine and serve 3 years of probation. And Snoop had to comply with this probation, which meant he needed to fire all of his security personnel because anyone with a criminal record was prohibited from being around him. As a result, he had no security, no guns, and the people from his own record label had turned against him and even wanted to kill him. About a month later, Snoop confirmed once again that he had a good relationship with Puff Daddy. Snoop appeared alongside Puff on the Steve Harvey Show in March 97 to make a public truce aimed at helping to calm down the tension between Bad Boy and Death Row Records and the East and the West Coast rivalry. On the TV show, Snoop and Puffy appeared together and they said,
"All that East Coast, West Coast stuff is a bunch of media hype. They're my dog from day one, you know what I'm saying? It's all good between me and him, that's my peoples."
For real, that's what we came here for. We came here to light it up and ride it up. We never used it.
So after Suge went to prison, Snoop quickly realized, according to him, that he wasn't being paid what he was rightfully owed. And it also turned out that things like cars and houses were not in the artist's name, but in the name of Death Row Records. For example, Corrupt had been given a car by Death Row, which he thought was his own car. But when Suge went to prison and problems started to arise, Corrupt's car was repossessed and towed away. So that was a clear sign that the ship was sinking. And Snoop also mentioned one time he did the song We Just Wanna Party With You together with JD for the Men in Black movie soundtrack that was released in 97 in July for $100,000, but Snoop never got paid for that. Around this time, Snoop also got back together again with Dr. Dre and they recorded the track Zoom, but unfortunately Death Row did not give permission to release the track, and that's why Dr. Dre later released the track together with LL Cool J instead of Snoop, and Snoop was obviously not happy with this. The unreleased version with Dre and Snoop has been leaked and you can find it online if you search for it. Snoop also started hearing from various sources that people from Death Row wanted to F him up, cut his hair and even kill him, as I already mentioned. So at this point a beef had developed between Suge, Death Row associates and Snoop, which is why he wanted to leave the label. Snoop told the Long Beach Press Telegram in 98 that he felt his life was in danger if he stayed in Death Row Records, and here you can see the statement that says Snoop left the label fearing for his life. He told Long Beach Press Telegram in 98, "I definitely feel my life is in danger if I stay in Death Row Records. There's nothing over there. Suge Knight is in jail, the president Dr. Dre left, and Tupac is dead. It's telling me that I'm either going to be dead or in jail, or I'm going to be nothing." After The Dogfather, Snoop was supposed to release an EP called The Documentary, which would include some new songs, leftovers and remixes. However, Death Row's plans to release the documentary were scrapped, which made Snoop angry and he soon began publicly claiming that he hadn't been paid in months. So therefore Snoop started working on a project called Corleone's Revenge, where we dissed Death Row on a couple of tracks. There was a problem though. Death Row still held the executive rights to Snoop Dogg and any music he tried to release. Simply put, if Death Row didn't sign off on a release, it was not going to happen. Relatively alone and without a strong support system, Snoop desperately sought an exit plan to save not only his music career, but his life as well. In the April 98 Source magazine interview, Snoop played the interview with some new songs from Corleone's Revenge, where he dissed Death Row and Suge Knight. I will go more into detail about these diss tracks and what Snoop said a little bit later in this video. And in that interview Snoop also revealed plans to do a Murder Was the Case-like short film for the Corleone's Revenge album. Years later, a mini movie was released titled Corleone's Revenge on Death Row Uncut, Too Gangsta for TV. So maybe Snoop was referring to that movie in the interview he did, or it was just another short film he made for which the title Corleone's Revenge was also used. And in the mini movie that was released on Death Row Uncut to Gangsta for TV, Snoop meets 2 women in a hotel room and eventually they try to set him up, and this results in a standoff between Snoop and one of the girls. And basically, after she gave him some head, he blew her head off. Now that's cold. And they also used some clips from that short film for the Head Doctor music video. Now back to the story. So the beef was on between Snoop, Suge and Death Row, and before Snoop signed with No Limit, the initial plan was to release an album, F Death Row, through Mac 10's label. In an interview, Snoop revealed that Mac 10 had offered him $1 million for this project. At that point, there was no mention of signing with No Limit, and Snoop mentioned in the Source magazine that his original plan was to finish his contract with Death Row, which was almost over, and Snoop said, quote, "I got a contract from 1991 I signed with Future Shock Records on it, and Future Shock Records was Death Row Records before we came up with the name of Death Row, and under the 7-year statute, I'm out of my contract, and not only that, they breached me, they ain't paid me, they stole my publishing, and they ain't never done ish for me, but F me because I didn't know," end quote. So Snoop was waiting for the 7 years to be over, and then he wanted to release the F Death Row album. And in 1999, a bootleg album was put out titled F Death Row, which you can find online, and this album features only 2 tracks where Snoop Dogg takes aim at Suge Knight and Death Row. Many of the tracks from this bootleg also appeared on Snoop's underground album Smoke Fest that was released on May 18 in 1998, which was about 2 months after Snoop Dogg signed with No Limit Records. Now these 2 bootleg albums featured Dogfather leftovers and sessions from when Snoop was about to leave Death Row. Additionally, a few loose tracks have leaked in which Snoop disses Death Row and Suge Knight. Now let's do a brief breakdown of some of the tracks recorded during this period where Snoop dissed Suge Knight and Death Row. And the first track we'll cover is titled Don't Do the Crime. It was produced by Mark in the Dark, and this was the first track on the F Death Row bootleg album and the 5th track on the Smoke Fest album. Years later, this track was also released on Welcome to the Church Volume 5, The Revival, where it was the 16th track on that album. And the lyrics "Don't do the crime if you can't do the time" are of course directed at Suge Knight, who was sentenced to up to 9 years in prison. And on that record, Snoop has a line in which he disses Death Row, and up next is a clip of the part where Snoop disses Death Row on that track.
I ain't up with them again no more. Shit, I feel the same way y'all feel. Looking up Death Row.
In an interview that Snoop would do years later, when he was recording the music video for the track Pimp Slap, he indicated that he only started dissing Death Row after he heard that Death Row associated people wanted to do something to him and cut his hair. Another track that you can find online, which was intended for the Corleone's Revenge and F Death Row album, is titled Death Row is Bitches. Sometimes it's also referred to as Death Row Killers. And this track also features Lil C Style, who was a member of the LBC crew, who made his debut together with Swoop G on the track Who Got Some Gangsta-ish that was released on the Murder Was the Case movie soundtrack, and that track also featured Snoop, Dez and Corrupt. And around this time in 97 and 98, there were also rumors that Suge Knight might have been involved in Tupac's death, and many people suspected Suge and that he was connected to the attack on Tupac. Snoop started to think about this as well, and this was later confirmed in a police report, but we'll get to that later. But in the song Death Row is Big, Snoop makes his thought about Suge's role in Tupac's death clear, and he says,
"My life ain't worth losing while riding shotgun, young, dumb, cruising, snoozing. But they put my Biggie and Tupac in the mix. Had he come with some real OG shit that ended didn't know what he was getting into. Had he caught up in the middle while he talking for his revenue."
And in this track there's also a mention of Top Dog, who was a new artist at Death Row at the time, and he was essentially meant to be a kind of a copy of Snoop. And Snoop says,
"Top dog, big dog, whatever y'all. Suge Knight, cause your company finna fall."
And Lil C Style also addresses Top Dog, and he starts his verse with the lyrics,
Now how the fuck you go from Snoop Dogg to a Top Dog?
And a quick side note about YGD the Top Dog is that on October the 7th in 97, while Snoop was still on Death Row Records released the gang-related movie soundtrack, which featured a bonus track titled Going Back to Cali, and this track was recorded by Top Dog, and on that track he disses Puffy, Biggie and Bad Boy Records. And because his voice sounded somewhat similar to Snoop's voice, some people actually thought it was Snoop who was dissing Puffy, Biggie and Bad Boy. And Reggie Wright also said one time in an interview that Going Back to Cali was released with the intention to cause some confusion and let people think it was Snoop. And Snoop also addressed the Going Back to Cali track by Top Dog in the Source magazine article, and he said this, quote, "I heard Death Row put a record out from a guy Top Dog, I think that's his name, where he's talking about Puffy and he sounds like me. Some dudes in New York think that's me. That ain't me. I love Puffy Combs. That's some fake dude Suge Knight got to sound like me. That's why God ain't blessing Suge Knight, cause he's acting like the devil right now. End quote. So based on this we can also conclude that the track Death Row is was recorded during the period between October 97 and April of 98. Many years later in 2016 this track was also released on the album Rappin' My Rag under Mo Tugs Records. And there's also an unreleased track titled Never Again produced by Meech Wells in which Snoop Dogg uses a verse from the Death Row is track but instead of
Had he caught up in the middle while he's hoping for his revenue.
he says
Got he slashed it on, then you get up for his revenue.
And of course this refers to Tupac being shot at in Las Vegas. So that clearly shows how Snoop felt about the situation surrounding Tupac's death and Suge Knight's role in it at that time. Snoop also recorded a track titled Baller Dog which uses the same beat as Never Again, but in that version the lyrics dissing Suge and Death Row have been removed. And this track also features Lil C style and technique. And there's even another version with the same beat with the title Crazy After Dark, and this one only features Snoop, and on this version the lyrics from the Death Row is track were not recorded. But in all these three versions, Snoop still delivers the line,
I'll put out my records independently, that way there ain't no yanking me.
and this line is also referred to in the Source magazine article, but they made a little mistake in the article by writing yanking instead of ganking me. But it's definitely clear that one of those three versions was also played for the interviewer from the Source magazine when he did the interview with Snoop. And the article also mentions an unreleased and unleaked track where Snoop says the line, "You stole my money and my soul." This track hasn't been leaked yet, so who knows, maybe we'll get to hear it one day. As mentioned, Snoop was in contact with Mac 10 to put out the F Death Row album, and No Limit Records and Who Bangin' Records were both on the Priority Records and Ice Cube's label. Snoop wanted to visit Mac 10 one day, and to get there he had to pass by the No Limit department where we ran into Mystical, who was signed to No Limit at the time. And although they didn't know each other personally, there was mutual respect and they agreed to collaborate on a song. The track they worked on was Gangsters, which was released on Mystical's album Unpredictable that was released in November of 97. And Master P asked Snoop how much he wanted for the future, and at that time Snoop was financially strained because his house, cars and everything were tied up with Death Row. And Snoop wanted $1,500 for the track, so he said to Master P that he wanted $15 for it. And the next day, instead of $1,500, Master P handed Snoop a check for $35,000. And soon after, Master P called Snoop into his office and he asked him what he was working on. And Snoop mentioned the F Death Row album, and Master P responded, quote, "You ain't gonna live to see that album come out. Don't do that. You can't make a record about Death Row and Suge Knight. You gotta let that ish go, man. Let me make a proposal to you.